Well, thank you all for coming to the Bullseye Resource Center. My name is Michael Endo. For those of you who I don't know, a lot of new faces in the crowd today, which is great. I am the curator at Bullseye Gallery, which is on Northwest 13th and Everett in the Pearl District. And we're here to hear from Crystal Schenk, whose exhibition Shelter just opened up this last Wednesday, and will run through December 21st. So there'll be plenty of time for you guys to make it downtown to see the exhibition. I first met Crystal after she sent a proposal to me for the exhibition that is currently up. I've been aware of her work for several years, and particularly through her exhibition, I have to look at my notes, Artifacts of Memory at Linfield College, which I had the pleasure of seeing, and also during the 2010 Portland Biennial that was curated by Chris Moss. Crystal received a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and then a Master of Fine Arts from Portland State University, where I went to school, in 2007. So I'm really pleased to introduce Crystal. Thank you all for coming.
All right. Is that on now? You guys can hear me? Okay. Not so used to the microphones. Thank you guys for coming today, especially since it's kind of our last sort of nice sunny day out there. Might be regretting it now that it's sunny. When they asked me to do this talk, I was a little hesitant and nervous about it because this is a glass place, and I knew that a lot of glass artists might be here, and I'm not specifically a glass artist. I tend to choose my materials really based on sort of material meaning and what both the physical and sort of metaphorical qualities of that material can bring to the work. So I'm going to be talking mostly about some past work and how that sort of led up to what I'm doing now. Both some sort of smaller object-oriented work as well as some of the larger installations that I've really slowly moved towards. So this isn't really in a chronological order. It's just sort of based on sort of some of my flowing interests through the years. One of the things that's been important for me as an artist is sort of to use what I make as a way of sort of delving a little bit into some personal ground and memories, which is kind of a tricky area to be in, because when you make personal art, like, well, why should anybody else care? You know, it's about me. It's very self-indulgent. But I really think that Artway is one of those paths that we connect through to people, and it's sort of a way for the artwork to talk without me having to. And I feel that kind of as viewers, there's a sense of voyeurism that happens, and not in a negative way, but in a positive way, where you're able to look and reflect and understand and connect and sort of enjoy seeing that somebody else might have gone through something similar, or maybe it sparks some memories in you. And so I really like to use my work sort of in that fashion. And it's also been good for me to sort of learn to take a deeper look personally and to be able to talk about it. I'm going to go through some of this and to sort of tell you some stories about some of the work. This is an older piece that I did, and I think it was like in 2005, and it was the beginning sort of some more personal exploration. And it was a series of cast resin bottles. I'll admit I wanted to cast them in glass, but didn't have the way to do it at the time. I might go back now, do some glass casting. But each one of them is holding a different metal or heavy metal that can cause physical or mental illness. So they're sort of totems standing in for the body. So one of them has lead, one of them has mercury, there's zinc, there's copper, and aluminum. And my interest really lied in this idea of how sort of toxins that we're commonly exposed to, say such as aluminum or mercury, can affect our mental health. the reason I was delving back into this is that my father was pretty severely mentally ill. He was bipolar with schizophrenic tendencies and had a breakdown when I was about 9 years old, and I was really never the same after that point. And so I was kind of interested in what was it that caused it, and doing some research, I found that a lot of times people who are schizophrenic have lower levels of zinc, and so that was one of the ones I wanted to sort of capture. And then also along that line, my father for a while wanted to be a gold miner. So he dragged my whole family up to Northern California, and we got to dredge and gold pan, which was really fun as a kid. And one of the ways that you extract the gold from the black sand is with mercury, which my dad used to let me play with. Not good for you, but really fun. This is sort of another very small piece. I wish we could kill the light from up there. Hopefully you guys can see it okay. So in 2004, coming back home actually from Burning Man, my friends and I were in a really bad auto accident. We were hit head on by a drunk driver. And it really, at the time, it was kind of a hard time in my life. My mom had just died a month before, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But it messed up my body and my back and sort of shook up my sense of my own physicality. I'd always been a very self-reliant person and considered myself strong, and it was very hard when I felt emotionally weak to also feel physically weak. So these are a series of little kind of like Jacob's Ladder toys, and they're etched copper from pictures of our car after the accident, which is on the right, which kind of looked like a wad of tinfoil after that point, and then some drawings of spines that I did on the left side. So the idea that as you play with them, it takes this very straight spine and sort of turns it upside down, back and forth with the images. And again, sort of a very cathartic piece to make. And I really liked the combination of taking this child's toy, something you're supposed to play with, and then turning it into something heavy and clunky that you're almost afraid to play with, and that had a lot more of a sort of heavy content to it. Come on in. Thank you. That was some stuff that I did before graduate school. And then once I got into graduate school, I continued to sort of play as far as different mediums go. I definitely, I don't feel like I have any sort of material monogamy. It's really fun for me to learn new skills, to play with different materials. And this is a dress that I made, and it was all out of one length of zipper. And so it just goes around and around and around and around. And I'll show you the text on there. But I embroidered over and over again. There's a time for departure even when there's no certain place to go. And at the time I was thinking about different clothing that sort of acts metaphorically for different states of being, and then, whether it's relationships or a place in your life. And while it seems like this would be pretty sexy to take off, it's really, really awkward and kind of unzip, and so it's like, and it takes forever to put on. It takes forever to put off. And so it's one of those things that I really liked, that the transition. It was, it's takes so long to go through it, you'd almost rather not. And so what is that one step that you want to take before you finally make that choice that it almost doesn't feel like a choice? Because sometimes choices are that difficult. So the Tennessee Williams quote, so over and over again, there's a time for departure, even when there's no certain place to go. Kind of a pair to that piece was this straitjacket corset. And I was kind of struggling at this point because people kept talking about the feminist aspect of my work, and I'm like, I'm not a feminist, but really when I look back, I have to admit it's pretty feminist work. But again, this was looking sort of at relationships and how we're often complicit in ways that we get bound up in them and bound up in life. And so this is an interesting piece because so it was made to fit my own body, and I had somebody, you have to be helped into it. So you have to trust somebody enough to be put into this straitjacket. And what I didn't expect was the feeling of panic being inside of it. Even though the person who put on me, it was my sister, it was safe, but I couldn't get out, and that feeling of being bound. It was a really sort of interesting experience. And so most of the time when the dress is shown and when this piece is shown, it's not on a person. And a lot of people were encouraging me to perform it, to do video, but what I really like is when it's on its own and people complete it in their own mind. And I think that's one of the reasons why people push to do, video or performance, is because they're imagining the fullness of that. But if you have, if I were to have this as a performance, that fullness of seeing it doesn't leave any imagination or room for the viewer. So I like to have it as an object and be a little bit more generous with how people imagine being completed in their mind. It's kind of continuing with the sewing at this point, but in a very, very different theme. So this was a tool belt that I made out of a Mardi suit. And at the time, right before graduate school, I was remodeling houses, and I had previously been working in a foundry, and I'd worked at a stained glass shop. I know how to drive a forklift. I've done dishes. I've used jackhammers, and it's not necessarily a space that you find many women in. And so it was kind of interesting being a woman in more heavy industries, but also sort of the classism of it. It was really interesting to go into stores after work and be in my grubby work clothes, and that happens now too, and the differences of how people are treated based on what your perceived, what you're wearing. And so I was thinking about the suit, the sort of costume of what we wear, and so that's why I wanted to take something that's supposedly very upper class and refined and use it to think about sort of tools of the trade. And you guys might have seen this one before. This is a piece called Have and Have Not, and it was done about the same period of time, 2006, 2007, and coming out of the same sort of idea of classism, remodeling all of these very, very nice Portland houses and seeing sort of that lifestyle. And what I think is interesting is that when you have enough money and you're comfortable, what do? We decorate, and we sort of have accessories, and but yeah, at the same time, going to these really incredible houses and then living in an area of town, and it's kind of any area of town where you see people who are homeless going up and down the street collecting bottles and cans and wear a shopping cart. It's not, it's a way of life, it's their home. And so I wanted to kind of combine this idea of a mass-produced object that is intended for mass consumption with what happens with the second it leaves a parking lot. It has a very, very different connotation. So it goes from consuming to being a way of surviving. And I thought that it was a really nice vehicle, as it was, to sort of hold both and to make that connection. And again, it's another piece that I find I learn a lot about my own work after it's made. So I've had people talking about the idea of the religion of consumption, and I hadn't really thought about it in that way. I definitely thought about the idea of church and sacredness, but that's something that afterwards I've really started to take on and to layer into my own interpretation of the work. It's one of the things that I really enjoy as an artist, is hearing afterwards what people's interpretation is or what something meant to them, because I feel like I'd be sort of remiss thinking that I know everything about my own work. Like, I only know what it means to me. So I love hearing stories about what other people think. So there's another view of that. And this was another piece that, I've been encouraged to go to the grocery store with or to go down the street with. And I like it on its own. What was interesting was in the gallery, people wouldn't think about it. They would just sit and they'd put their arms on it and they'd like rock back and forth, just like you do at the grocery store. And they would just space out the fact that it was a piece of art, and they'd instead go back to the relationship they have typically with that object. So this was in Portland 2010, and it's, let's see, I guess it was 2007. I got the Student Award for Contemporary Sculpture through the International Sculpture Center. So it's been there, and kind of sort of, I don't know, it was a really important piece to me. It now sits in my house and sometimes holds shoes. So if anybody wants a stained glass shopping cart, I have one for you. Okay, so again, completely different direction material-wise, and this one became a lot more self-focused. So this was a project where I crocheted all of my fingerprints, and they're about 10 by 14. And this was right after graduate school, and there was a few things that I had in mind for the next project I wanted to do. For starters, I had to be able to watch stupid movies while I was doing it, and I had to be able to take it anywhere, and it had to not be stressful. So I started this project, and what I did was I very meticulously scanned in each of my fingerprints, and then I went into Photoshop and color-coded each of the sort of spirals. I should have included that. I love those just as images. And then very, very carefully crocheted each one of them. So some of the things that had been going through my mind at the time, at this point I lost both of my parents, and I was thinking about the idea of inheritance and what is important to us. I noticed going through my mom's things that we had some like crystal bowls and things like that are probably worth something, but what was worth the most to me was this old pie bowl that she probably got at the Saturday market. It's ceramic, it has a crack in it, and I treasure that more than anything. And it's worthless, but it's worth so much. And my grandma's, my mom's mom had passed away, and I inherited a lot of doilies from her. She's from Indiana, she loved doilies, and so I started thinking about this idea of inheritance and the little things, the traces that we leave behind. And so thinking about fingerprints as a trace for what we leave behind, or little bits of our DNA. At the time, I wasn't sure if I was going to ever have kids or not. And so, again, thinking like what would be the little traces that I would leave. And this is a little bit more recent. This is 2008 to currently. I started playing around with growing crystals. And so I'm aware of, my name is Crystal, I'm growing crystals. This is actually what I'm named after. So my parents were always rock hounds, and growing up we would go out into the mountains and we dig, for gold, for quartz crystals, for tourmaline, and they drove me all over the country doing this. And as a kid, it's really boring a lot of the time. You go out to Bakersfield, California, you're digging for shark's teeth, it's 99 degrees out, and I'm sure we were really whiny, and if I could go back and apologize, I would, because now it's some of the most treasured memories I have. And so what I think about is, all of these things that, took millennia to grow, and the preciousness of it. And I wanted to apply that sort of same sense of preciousness to something that I essentially grow overnight. And so I did a lot of research and a lot of experimentation, and ended up finding various ways of using household chemicals and sugars and salts and laundry soaps that all crystallize in the right conditions. And so I started a series of that, and moved a little bit more towards using found skulls and antlers and bones, just from my wanderings through, especially Central Oregon. I like to spend a lot of time out there and wandering around. You find quite a lot of deer skeletons. And it definitely has sort of a lean towards kind of an Americana theme, a little bit Southwest in some ways. This is a piece that was also up at Disjecta for Portland 2010, and I titled it Holy Cow. Somewhat after, reminiscent of Damien Hirst's skull. Are you guys familiar with that, the diamonds? Yeah. And also just thinking about, in several cultures, cows are actually like a holy animal who's revered, and so I liked that little bit of a connection. The larger crystals are actually quartz crystals that my family found when I was a kid, and then everything else is grown on there. And this is a Longhorn Steer. I actually found the skull on eBay. You can see the bullet hole right up there, which I really enjoy about that. The next project I'm going to do is I have a llama skeleton. So my husband Shelby and I, one of our friends lived out on this farm, and their neighbor's llama died and kind of wandered off. And they found it a few months later, and it was mostly skeleton, and they wondered if I wanted to have it. And so we brought it home, but it turns out it was skeleton and quite a bit of ick. So I boiled it, and then, Shelby, he helped me. We suited up and we scraped it, and we were like hazmat, and it's raining and it's miserable. It was gross. It was one of the grossest things I've ever done. There's maggots. It was gross. But now it is beautiful and white and pristine, and I can't wait to put it all together and do this process with it. But it was kind of interesting to learn about bone preservation and a little bit about taxidermy, and so that project started to lead into some other things with skulls and animals, and this is part of another new series that I started, I guess, in 2010 or 11, and I'm still continuing on. And it was inspired a lot by some of my travels. We went to New Orleans, and there's the Mardi Gras Indians. If you ever go to New Orleans, I highly recommend go to the Backstreet Cultural Museum. It's right outside the French Quarter, way better than any of the established museums they have. This guy, I don't remember his name, John, something like that. He'll give you a tour for 1 hour, exactly 1 hour, and then he kicks you out. But they have all sorts of stuff from the Mardi Gras Indians and the jazz clubs and the second line funerals and all this stuff that's just incredible. And you can go and you can see the beadwork. And it's really interesting learning a lot more about it, and how they choose the imagery, how it's so much of a family thing, and a little bit about how their history really developed this culture that they're holding on to. And I don't really feel like I have a strong cultural inheritance. My family is from the Midwest. My parents, I've lost my parents. I don't feel like I have any traditions or any craft traditions. And so it was interesting to start to borrow from other craft traditions and thinking about my cultural heritage as far as iconography goes. And about the same time, I'd gone down to Mexico, and the Huichol Indian tribe has a technique of beading. And so this is their technique of beading. I met a man down there who taught me how to do it, and it's essentially using beeswax and then beads that are very individually placed. And most of the time with my projects, I have everything very well thought out ahead of time, how I want to make it, a lot of the concepts pretty solidified. With these, it started to evolve into some scary territory for me because I was just going intuitively and picking backgrounds and images that were sort of just on my mind, and then thinking about their connections later as they started to evolve. So a lot of these, I have 3 pieces right now, but I'm noticing they're starting to gear towards emblems of power and a lot of times war or, I'm not sure exactly where it's going to go. So this is sort of like Atari, like explosions and a hand grenade, which is also sometimes referred to as a gator, and then some plaid background, very popular in the Northwest. And this is the first piece that I did. And it's a white-tailed deer skull that I was given in South Carolina. I went to this sort of Pioneer Day type thing that was, Shelby's family is from South Carolina, and at the Haygood Mill every year they have people come and they show you their crafts and how to make bows and shoot arrows and make grits. And so a woman there, she had it on display, and I asked if she was selling it, and she said no, but I'll give it to you. And I really enjoyed, I like how I obtain things. I think that that's just as important as the work. So on there is a Colonial Star, which you'll see a lot through Central Oregon and a lot of times out in the country. It's something that I've noticed becoming more and more popular, and of course has a pretty strong history. And then the pistols are from my favorite tequila bottle. It's Revolution, which is titled, very good tequila, I highly recommend it. And there's just a close-up so you can see like the patterning. Somebody had asked my husband once how I could stand to do it. And he says, I think it soothes her. And it does. I really like repetitive things just over and over with my hands. It keeps me focused. I have a hard time sitting and doing nothing. And this is the last one that I just finished. And it is a cow skull that we found hiking up on Mount Hood. And so it has an old-fashioned syringe, like a really old style, and then the filigree. And with this one, it kind of came back to being a little bit more personal. I'm going to talk a bit more about my mother with another piece, but this kind of relates back to her death. And I was thinking about how medications can be used to help us, but a lot of times they hurt us, whether it's intentionally or accidentally. And so in that case, I feel we often are powerless sometimes in our own health with medical systems. And when I was researching some of the ideas for this, I was actually staying, I've gone to a place in Switzerland, St. Arban, several times for residencies. And one of the places that I've stayed there is actually an old insane asylum that's been reformed into a private museum and apartment. And so thinking about how medication and subduing used to be a way of controlling people, and sometimes still is. And there's a close-up of that. So next up, I think is going to be a buffalo skull, so even larger. Okay, so this is getting more into my installation work, and this was part of my my graduate thesis show from PSU in 2007. I probably should have split that, but those are 2 different views of it. And the whole show was called Artifacts of Memory, and is kind of took on the title of the other piece, which I'll show you in a minute. So at the time, and let's see, I guess it was in the summer between my years of graduate school, my dad had died. And so this was in 2006. And what had happened was he had accidentally overdosed on the medication that he was on to help with the bipolar and schizophrenia. And it's not something, I don't feel like it was on purpose, but, he was often confused. He didn't know what he should take. And we found out later that the doctor had prescribed him more of a certain type of medication that you should take. If you get too much serotonin in your system, it can kill you. And so it was a hot day, and you probably had to have enough water, and he collapsed. And so it was very, very unexpected and very very difficult, especially at that time. And so this was in the summer right before going back to graduate school. And I really had no motivation to make art. I had no motivation to be there. And there was one day I was walking to the store, and I was on my way back, and I had my head down, and the sun came out, and I lifted my head just to like feel the warmth, and I opened my eyes, and there was a bunch of birch trees there. And this memory that I'd had, that I didn't remember for years and years, and it was camping in an aspen forest in Colorado with my family, and it just flooded back to me. I hadn't thought about it in years, and the feeling of it, the smell, everything, it was so strong. And so I decided to go ahead and recreate an aspen forest. And so what I wanted to do is, instead of recreating my entire memory, what I wanted to do is just give the viewers a slice of it. And so taking my memory, instead of bringing you into my memory, I was bringing my memory into a space that we all we existed in a lot of times, and it's like this really drab office space, you know. So what I did was, within the gallery, I created false walls and a false ceiling with the office tiles and the fluorescent light. So the one fluorescent light is kind of like the sun in there, and so bringing it into sort of this uninspired space that we inhabit for about 8 hours plus of our day a lot of times. And so the trees are all made with cardboard tubes and then covered in black felt and then string. And so it was the silver string and white string, and then I pulled it apart in different places to give it sort of that birch or aspen-like feel. And then all the leaves were made out of paper, and the stems were beaded, as well as the little catkins. So again, very, very labor intensive and very hands-on and very meditative. It gave me a quiet place to be and to think. And a lot of times people, you know, they'd ask, well, why did you choose this for your show? It's like, well, there was nothing else. Like, I had no ideas, I had nothing else except for this memory. And at the time I started doing a lot of research into memory and memory function, and learning about Flashbulb Memories, which essentially is when something triggers a memory that's really strong. And then mood congruity. So mood congruity is, if you're in a certain mood, like if you're really, really happy, your brain actually seeks out happy memories. If you're in a sad place, your brain seeks out sad memories. That's why when you're depressed, it feels like you've always been depressed, and you always will, because your brain is actively trying to agree with your state of being at that time. And so I think this memory kind of came out at a hard time, because that sunshine and the feeling of it, it just like let this window of happiness in, and a similar feeling emerged. And so it was really interesting to learn that. And it was also helping me sort of scientifically explain away my emotions, which I tend to do. But what was really hard is, at the end of it, I feel like I had mined my memory to the point where I don't have that memory anymore. I have sort of a recreation of it, and that was really, really difficult at the end, because our memories, they're not like reading a textbook. You don't take it off the shelf and read it and put it back, and the next time you see it, it's just like it was. When you remember something, you're re-remembering it and putting it back. So every time, it's not a carbon copy, but a diminished or changed copy that's been influenced by how you feel that day, things that have happened since that event occurred. And so I think the idea of memory started to really seep into my work, and how the ways we experience memory are both, I don't know, they're very joyous, but at the same time it's kind of sad. You know, you can't hold on to all of them, although sometimes that's good. This was an installation I did in 2008, with about, I don't know, I think there was about 600 magnets that I embedded into the walls. And I was interested in collective experience and collective memories. And so I had people come into the gallery, and you can see there's a bowl in the center there. I had 2 big bowls of steel shot. And the idea was that people could put it up on the walls and manipulate it and play with it and interact. And it was the first time that I had purposely made a piece that was for interaction. And it turns out it's very difficult to get people to interact with artwork. There's a bunch of people that come into the gallery, and I'd welcome them in, like, feel free, and just leave again. And so I finally, I realized something had to spark it. So I just took a little bit and I put it up on the wall. And you can see this first 2 people in there. And they were really nicely dressed, had just gotten off work. They came in and I said, feel free to do whatever you'd like in this space. And they look at the bowl and they look at me and they're like, really? Anything? I'm like, yeah. And they go, throwing it, smearing it. Like, he took off his jacket. They had the best time. And so then once they started it, other people knew too. But without that spark, nobody would. We're not accustomed to touching the artwork. And so it was a really fun night. People would, there's obviously only certain places the magnets are. It's only going to stick in certain ways, but they would sculpt with it. And so that's a close-up of it. And you can really see the magnetic fields and build it up from the wall or scrape it away. And, at the end of the night, I had one girl, she must have been about 6 years old, she came up and she said, that was better than ice cream. And I think that's the best compliment I've ever gotten on my artwork. All right, so Michael had talked about seeing an exhibition at Linfield Gallery, and so this is a larger version of what I had done as part of my MFA thesis. And so this is sort of the second iteration of Artifacts of Memory. And what it is 1,100 magnets. Half of them are strung from the ceiling and the other half are tethered to the floor. So the top ones hold, the bottom ones up in space. And then they're covered with these silk pods. And the 2 pieces together at my graduate thesis show, they were really a tribute to my parents. So the Aspens was about my dad, and this piece was about my mom. So in 2004, a month before that accident I told you about, my mom had died, and she had taken her own life. And she was diabetic. She had found that out maybe a month or so before, and she overdosed on the insulin. So again, thinking about things that are supposed to help you. She was a nurse, so she knew that would work for her. And at the time, it was just incredibly difficult. I didn't realize she had been so depressed. I didn't realize that that was imminent. But at the same time, it made sense. My sister okay. We didn't see it coming, but we weren't surprised at the same time. And the hole that it left was just, it was incredible. It was this space, and I knew where it would hurt, thinking about it. Just being, looking at pictures, going to her house and cleaning it, it was so obvious, the edges of where it would hurt. But over time, that started to dissipate, and it wasn't really clear. And it wasn't Christmas or her birthday or my birthday. It was some Tuesday where, I would hear a Rod Stewart song because she loved Rod Stewart. Or just for no reason at all. And that was almost harder because it wasn't expected. And so what I wanted to do was create a piece that had that feeling of a cloud and expansion, and also the sense of longing. And so I wanted these pieces to be really ethereal. It's not very specific to my experience. You don't need to know that story. You guys get to because you're here. But I wanted it to have that feeling of expansion, of connection, and sort of a quiet, meditative space. And again, looking back at memories and thinking about the synaptic gap. And so that space in between, and there's a close-up there, is sort of, it's a very tense space. It's very occupied by its emptiness. And I don't know, it was interesting. I really enjoyed going into the gallery and seeing people's reactions because they would slow down. When you enter a space and it's your day, you're going, you get into that space and people would really slow down. And they would, I don't no, the people would sit on the floor. I had students coming back and spending time in that space. It's just, it kind of became like a really reverent space, whether people knew what it was about or not. And one of the reasons I covered them in the silk pods is I wanted to soften it. And it was also something that sort of connected back to my mother, who loved to grow flowers and dry flowers. And so I wanted to have like a really natural, warm and soft feel to it. And this was another interesting sort of foray at the time into memory research for me, because I was really curious why some memories hold on so strongly. At first I remembered the way she smelled and her voice, and now I struggle to think about that. Versus other memories won't go away. Like the moment I found out, I could replay that in my mind over and over and over with absolute clarity. And it's just that events that happen to us that are hard, that are shocking or traumatic, we remember in a deeper way because our body is trying to protect us from having that happen in the future. So if there's a traumatic event, your body gets all upset because it's trying to keep you from that trauma again. So it was, again, sort of looking at scientific explanations for why I had these feelings. So these are just various views of that. It was really nice seeing it like from below or above. It almost was like a reflecting pond in a way, versus at eye level was a very different experience. I was a little selfish, it's my eye level. So if you're short, you have to get up on tiptoes, or if you're tall, you had to shrink down a little bit. So those are just the last of those pictures. And that brings me to the current exhibition. So shelter, how many people have been down to the gallery? A couple of people? Everybody else is going to go eventually? All right. So this piece I've been wanting to do for quite a few years. And as I mentioned, my husband's from South Carolina, and so I've got to spend a lot of time down in the South, through South Carolina, North Carolina, up into Virginia, and I've been, we've taken a lot of road trips through there. And so it's started to develop like this strong hold on my heart. I love going back there. And it's a very different way of life. It's a very different feeling. My other side of the family is from Arkansas. So going through the Ozarks, it has a very similar feeling as well. And so this piece attaches back conceptually to the have and have not in the shopping cart, just thinking about applying sort of upper class materials in a way to a lower class way of life. And so in this case, the stained glass is, we think about it a lot in churches, and we think a lot about it sometimes in homes. And I really liked the idea of it being a sort of stand-in for the wood. So all the glass was from here at Bullseye. I worked with them, and this is a glass that I had years ago worked for a stained glass company, and I just remembered it and the feeling of it and the warmth of it, and I loved it. So I finally got to sort of realize this project. I got a rack project grant, and which if, for artists in you guys, I highly recommend looking into. It's a really wonderful way to have projects realized, and it helped me cover materials, which was wonderful. And so I decided to embark on this project, and not really realizing how insane it would be to make. And I'll talk about the story of making it in a little bit. So driving through the hills of South Carolina, and we see it here in Portland too, definitely class disparity. But the difference in people who have money and don't have money isn't nearly as startling as it is in the South. You go and there's these huge old antebellum houses in sort of 4-story new mansions everywhere around a lake, and you drive a mile away and there's these roads with rundown shacks that people still live in, and 3 trailers on a project or on a property, and just absolute poverty. And also, if you go up into the hills, it's not just about poverty, it's actually just a way of life. I really love going to the flea market there because you have these like 80-year-old guys, 90-year-old guys that go every single Wednesday, and they all get together and they play their instruments and sing and love it. And the guy who plays, is it like the jug? He's also who you get the moonshine from. So it's just, it's really interesting to me how this way of life, it's very much still back to like pioneer spirit, and where people are very, very self-sufficient. Just as just a matter of course. That's the way it is for them. And so you reuse things and you make your own clothes and you moonshine. And so I wanted to have that feeling of a house that was very, very humble and sort of on the verge of collapse, but that once you go inside, it's very warm and welcoming, and it feels like home, and it feels like a space that could be lived in and to be proud of. And so unfortunately it's hard with the light to see it. These are really, really dark. So this was made over the course of, from June until 11:30 at night, the night before I installed it. It was kind of the back. Yeah, these are really hard to see. I apologize about that. And so I started off with actually a SketchUp drawing, which is very, very, wow, you can barely see that. You guys are just gonna have to go to the gallery. So started off with this drawing, and then when I was in the studio, I was, Welding was down at PSU. They let me use their space since I teach there. And I started playing and manipulating the steel and trying to get that feeling of being on the verge of collapse. And then from that, started in on the glass. And the entire thing bolts together. It was important to be able to transport, so that started to lead to a lot more work than I planned. And then about August, at the very, very beginning of August, I learned I was pregnant, which was great. And then the first trimester hit, which was really not great. And I was exhausted and felt sick for 2 months, and everything ground to a halt. And the second I was feeling better, I got back into the studio and was working on the glass pretty much nonstop, 4 days a week. And towards the end, like the last 3 or 4 weeks, my husband was in there working with me almost every day. I had friends volunteering, and it was a lot of catching up to do. And I realized exactly how ridiculous of a project I did yet again, because this is not the first time I've done this to myself. I always do this to myself and wonder, like, why don't I make tiny drawings? Tiny drawings, Crystal. They don't take that long, they're transportable, and people buy them. No, I'm going to make expensive projects that are heavy, hard to move, and still up for sale, but you know. I don't think everybody has room for a small shack. And again, it's so hard to see. On the inside, one of the things I really liked was the feeling this glass changes in the light, and so from the outside it has sort of you see the greens and some blues and the whites and a little bit of brown in the streaks, but once you go inside with the lighting from the inside, it's warm, and it has this wonderful lush brown. And inside, again, it's so hard to see with the light bouncing. There's an old kind of wood table, and there's a cot. There's actually a woman laying down in there the other day in the gallery, which I thought was great. And then the storm lantern there is actually from my childhood. It's one of the few things that I held on to, and it's just like an old silver lantern, and we used to use that whenever we'd have blackouts, and living in Northern California and in towards the mountains here in Oregon, you get the ice storms and don't have power for a week, and those are some of my favorite memories. One of the things that was important to me was to use something of my own personally, and also I really liked the difference between this old cot and this table that's like made of 2x4s and about to fall down, and something that was precious and meaningful to me, because I think one of the things, that I see in a lot of families that don't have much money, and I did not have much money growing up, is that there's one or two things that are really special and important and valuable to the family get passed down from generation and generation to generation. And so I wanted to have that in the gallery. So I have to say I'm still working on everything this means to me. One of the things, a few years ago, Shelby and I had done an installation downtown, and it was this flock of owls, and they were landing around a raven, and it was in a window storefront, and we had our websites on there, and people would write us, and they'd tell us what it actually meant to them. They'd tell us stories that they had encounters with barn owls or ravens, and it was really wonderful to have it in a public space where people felt like they could just get in contact with us. And one of the things I've noticed is in galleries, people don't do that. So I go and I talk to the people who are at the gallery, and I say, what did you hear? And so I think, I need to spend more time with this piece and hopefully hear back from the people who are in the gallery who have spent time with it to really, really fully understand everything, one, that it means to me, but also how it affects other people. So I think that's one of the things I'm really looking forward to with this is to see how it affects other people. One of my hopes is to have it go to various galleries around the country, but also have it make it back to the place that inspired it at some point too. Because I don't really like the idea of it being about people from outside. I don't want to just be a voyeur in that culture. It's also for people there. And so I feel it's necessary to have it there and be for those people too. So that's hopefully the history of it, or the future of it. So I have about 15 minutes if you guys have questions. Yes?
I was wondering how long it would take you to do the beaded skulls.
So it depends. The cow skull, the big one, it took me a year, but it wasn't a year solid. It was, several evenings. I don't keep track of hours because it would kind of be depressing to know how much time I spend on something. But I'm guessing for some of the smaller ones, maybe 80 hours. That larger one, much more. I think this on the welding alone was, like 150 hours, and then all the glass. Yeah, a lot of time. Yeah.
How about with that magnetic installation? I wonder if there's any kind of kinetic aspect to it too, helping temperature.
Oh, yeah.
Or something to see what happened, or ventilation in the rooms.
Yeah, so you're one of the people I have to sign up for, don't touch.
It's like a time bomb.
Yeah, it is. So you can put your hand between them,
Yeah.
and they don't fall. And you can lightly pull, and you can feel the tension, and it's wonderful. And if you and I were in the gallery, I'd say, go for it. The first time I had it up, and it was about half as big, people would come in there, and there was no sign, and they'd kind of like press against them. And once they get going, and so I'd come into the gallery, and there'd be whole sections I'd have to unclump and re-glue to the floor. It was not fun. Yeah, but it's the wind, just like the natural currents, if you walk through, they just kind of there's a sense of shivering, and you really notice if you're up above, like that little slight movement and ripples. Yeah, it's hard with just photos. I feel like that's one of the pieces you have to be there in person. Yeah.
With the crystal pieces, so they're in an active state of growing, or is there a way to suspend that so that they stop where you want them? What's that like?
So the way that I do it is in a saturated bath. And so the second you take it out of that bath, they stop growing. And then I seal them. So yeah, they've stopped their growth at that point. There's a lot of crystal growing websites. And so I actually, when hired that, that was a little buddy of mine. I guess he must have been 4 at the time. He and his 2-year-old sister and mom went to OMSI, and they were going to buy me a birthday gift. And so the 2-year-old and 4-year-old bought me one of those crystal growing kits. And I was like, you know, I could just grow this on anything. And so that's kind of how that got started. Yeah. And you can, yeah. Other questions at all?
What are the dimensions in the Aspen farms?
That was I think it was like a 12 by 16 foot room, and then the Aspens are 10 feet tall. I probably worked on making them over the course of 3 months, 4 months, and then put up the show, both the Aspens and the smaller version of the magnets in a week, with help. That's the one thing with the installations is there's no way I could go in and do it. You know, the larger piece, we had 10 days, and there was usually 2 or 3 people working from about 10 a.m. until 8 p.m. every day to get that up.
Why do you help?
Why do I need help? So if you think about 10 days and 2 people working 10 hours a day, there's just no way I could do it all by myself. Like, I wouldn't get it done in time. You have such a small amount of time. Well, there's definitely a time limit. If say I had all the time in the world to do that, I think I'd like to have help. It's nice. It gets a little lonely in there, and you might not have noticed from my work, but it's a little anal. It's a little controlling, and to let go and to have, say, somebody else help and say, this is what I want it to look like. This is the parameters. You find your way of doing it. That's really good for me as a person to let go. You had a question?
Yeah, Gavin from those farms, and he said in his gallery, you and your mother made a full-size cinema.
Yeah, so Shelby, my husband here, he and I collaborate sometimes, and so that was our first collaborative project. I debated whether to include that today. So we made a full-size semi-truck out of drywall and 2x4s that were merging into a and that was also a Disjecta too, the larger version. Yeah. We're moving that next weekend out of Disjecta's attic. If you know anybody who needs a life-size drywall semi-truck, that is also up for bids. What do you do with this stuff? You know, we have like a sculpture park in our backyard now. So. Yeah.
What keeps you dedicated to one project and
That's a really good question. There's some projects that I can layer. Like if I'm doing some of the smaller work, I'll work on something bigger at the same time, or a couple of things. With something like this, it's a pressing deadline that just keeps you going. I just tend to focus, like once I start on something, that's kind of all I want to do. So I think for me, having deadlines is really helpful. So, you know, trying to set up either a show or, you know, if it's a commission, having an endpoint. But it's also just, it feels good to be making. It's at that point all I want to do. I don't want to go to the grocery store or clean my house. I just want to work on that thing. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, I think it's really interesting. I feel like it's important for this project to go back to its role, just because I think in the case of the Aspen before, it's like you're reconstructing these very specific things in memory, but from the events into the gallery, and we follow you kind of poorly whoever heard. So why in the case of this project, I mean, what do you feel like you and for the piece and also for its reception, which is really exciting?
So yeah, it was kind of interesting. I started posting pictures of this, and some family and friends there, they had a really strong identification with it, like stronger than people here. Like they really got it. They really understood it. It felt like it was speaking to them. And I hadn't really considered trying to find a gallery there to show it in until I started to get that response. I struggle with the idea of having it just in galleries, quite frankly, because if it is about people like who either live out in the woods or live in poverty, like I feel like the people who go to a gallery are a certain subset of the population, and if I can find places that it is more public, I'd really like to do that. And there's some issue of safety of the glass and for people, but like the idea of having a more public square would be nice. So for this one, because I guess the location of the inspiration, and because it's a personal piece, but it's not a personal piece that just revolves around me. I feel like bringing it there and hearing other people's stories would bring a depth and richness to my understanding of it that I'm really looking forward to. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, have you done, it seems like you're working, it seems like you're very much building it for the second gallery. Have you ever done any installation with outside galleries? What is this in your
I haven't. Shelby and I have a public art project that next fall will be going along Division Street. And once we did the owls, it made me really want to get stuff more out into public spaces just because it's such a different interaction. So yeah, I'm hoping at some point to start working towards that.
I just kind of appreciate what you said about the objects themselves, having an ongoing conversation, not being related to a specific performance. Because the shopping cart, I worked on Skid Row and I know I can just imagine some of the people I work out with that in both of them in terms of religion and in terms of the church that plays on the corners of it.
Yeah, thanks. I like that. Thank you.
Is it out?
No. You can see it on my website, which is just crystalshank.com. I have pictures there. I have owls in my closet, if you want to know. Again, I'm just like hawking things there. That's my work.
Selling owls.
Yeah. It was up again at Whitetailed and Kennedy for a while. Shelby and I did some big sculptures of like a Yeti and a unicorn, a Loch Ness monster, and those were there. I don't think they'll go up again, but we do have pictures. You can see them. Yeah. A couple more. Yeah.
Sorry, it's a second. I just was curious, you have a child, right?
No, we're working on it.
Are you working on it? Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's right there.
But I was going to say already that this is kind of from sort of a memory backward focus to, you've been through a lot.
Yeah.
What's that sure like for you now? How does it mark you?
In
terms of your creative.
I think there's going to be. I'm not entirely sure. I think that I feel like I've done really well as a person to take care of myself and to make sure that I'm okay through all of this, and to make sure that there's mental illness on both sides of my family, that like moving forward that I'm a really happy, healthy person, for my family. And so I've been so focused on getting this done that now I'm really excited to like sit down with some tea in my belly and fire and enjoy the winter. And I'm afraid of what's going to happen to my studio practice when there's a tiny thing holding on to me for 2 years. But I also really am excited to see how it changes. And I'm really glad that I'm not afraid to make personal artwork, because if I get a little self-indulgent and it's about my family for a while, I'm okay with that, because I think that my practice is going to have to really change. But at the same time, I have like little tiny things that I work on that I think will be congruent with that new lifestyle. Yeah, we'll see. Ask me in a year how I'm doing. Yeah. All right. Any last questions? Well, thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming to the Resource Center, and I hope to see you at the gallery. Again, the exhibition runs through December 21st. We're open Monday through Saturday, 10 to 5. You can come in and tell us what you think about the piece. And you can tell Crystal.
Email me.
Tuesday. Yeah. What's that? Tuesday, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Tuesday through Saturday. Yeah, so thank you all for coming.